All right. We now are officially finished with week 4 in college football, but most importantly, we are now finished with our first official week of Big Ten head to head conference football play, where we actually now finally have a clearer picture of where these teams rank amongst themselves now that they've played head to head. And this is a power ranking. This is not based on resume. This is looking at teams, how well teams perform, and the eye test in these games relative amongst each other. So stay tuned, because there's a lot of teams that were exposed this week. And there are some teams that were better than what we thought they were. So there's been a lot of movement and changes in this week's power ranking. So kicking off our top half of the Big Ten, just free falling to the bottom is Penn State at number 9. And we know the obvious reason why. After losing to Oregon, I just thought, there we go. Again, they just lost to another top 5 team and that they can't physically bully. And of course, they didn't improve at all in the passing game by getting 3 receivers in the transfer portal. But I was thinking they might sneak into the playoffs again, like last year with 10 wins, and it's just life under James Franklin. And they'll just beat up on every team that they are supposed to beat, like they always do. And, Drew Aller, of course, is overrated, and he just wasn't the guy everybody hyped him up to be. Then this happened, this Saturday. They were beaten. They were beaten. They didn't just lose, but got beaten by UCLA. Now, UCLA might have the greatest Cinderella-type turnaround this season, and this might end up looking like a better loss by the end of the season. Who knows? But these last 2 games were just ass. And Aller, I never understood the hype going into the season, frankly. I just didn't get it. I had not seen any evidence from the past 2 seasons that he can drop back on third downs and throw to receivers that aren't a security blanket like Warren was, and just throw to 2 receivers with good ball placement, or to receivers that are not schemed wide open. He just can't do it with any consistency at all. He's an average at best quarterback, average at best Big Ten quarterback. And I might be generous with that because there are a lot of good quarterbacks in the league this year. And looking at the defense these past 2 games doesn't look like a championship elite defense that can overcome their offensive shortcomings. Yes, they still have maybe the best O-line in the country, at least run blocking wise, but they are still one-dimensional on offense, even when they try not to be. And I'm not going to go and beat the whole James Franklin stigma into the ground. It's been said enough that you don't need to hear me say it. Okay, so at number 8, I have the USC Trojans, who were idle this week and moved up 1 spot by default of Penn State dropping really far down. And they lost to Illinois the previous week by a last-second field goal in a high-scoring game that really showcased the talent of both Jaden Maeva at quarterback and Makai Lemon at wide receiver. And that's the strength of the team, is really, I would say, they're skill players. That is really the strength of this team. And I think it's arguable that Jaden Maeva is probably the best quarterback in the Big Ten. And I've even heard arguments from national media that he might be the best quarterback in college football. And I'm not going to really argue against that. He just looks like the real deal to me. And their wide receivers are talented. But here's the thing. They got exposed by Illinois, who, in the trenches a little bit, who is not a good trench team. Illinois is not stout. They lost. I mean, they got blown out by Indiana, and they got destroyed in the trenches on both sides of the line of scrimmage in that game. And they low-key got exposed in the trenches by even Duke. And the fact that Illinois got the better of USC in the trenches, I don't think reflects really well on USC right now. They got rushed on for 171 yards by Illinois. And frankly, as a Michigan fan, I'm actually looking at this game, I'm worried about a lot of things because, USC is dangerous and Michigan has to travel really far. You have to worry about that quarterback. You have to worry about that passing game. But I'm kind of like thinking Michigan has an opportunity to put up 300 yards rushing on them, honestly. And thing that's been intriguing about Lincoln Riley is how slow he's adapted to Big Ten play. It seems like he hasn't adapted at all. The team is just not stout in the trenches, and that's really what's missing with this team. And defensively, they're not good. Even with their coach, their defensive coordinator, who came from UCLA, and really did a great job under Chip Kelly. And every stop before that, he did really well. So it looked like it was inevitable that this defense would improve each year. It looks like they've regressed to me, to be honest. So I think up to this point, USC really has not really adapted to Big Ten play. I don't know if it's player development, like the style of play that they're playing, or it's just the way they're recruiting, or getting people from players from the transfer portal. But they're just not stout as much as they definitely need to be to be as successful as they want to be in the Big Ten. That's why they're at 8 or 9, ranking wise. I'll say this, though. I think every game will be fun and intriguing. I don't think they're going to be out of any game this year because they're so talented in offense, particularly in the passing game. They're so dangerous there. But that's really their strength, and we'll see how things go from there for them. All right, coming in at number 7, I have the Iowa Hawkeyes, and they were on a bye week this week, coming off a loss the previous week to Indiana in a very, very close defensive battle, very, very nice old school kind of Big Ten football game, which Iowa tends to drag opponents into. But Indiana was very game for it, and they were very prepared. So this was a very physical game. This wasn't really bad football and a ton of bad offense. It was really more good defense than bad offense, I think. And Indiana just kind of made more plays at the end just because they have playmakers, whereas Iowa really doesn't. And that was the difference in the game. One thing I'll give props to for Iowa is that with their new offensive coordinator, they've improved on offense. It goes without saying that this was probably the most putrid offense in Power 4 and Power 5 football from 2021 to 2023 with the nepotism child. But their quarterback play has certainly improved, and the bar, frankly, was really low, and it's not a hard bar to rise above and clear. But I think Gonzalez, it's kind of a fresh breath of air, I think, to see them have a quarterback that's somewhat competent. I don't think he's good. I don't think he's really good. He might be average at best, but maybe not even average. But he's all right. He can at least stand in there with poise and find receivers when they're open. He can go through progressions. And several times in this game, he did a really good job of identifying where blitzes were coming in, at him and where those vacated areas from the blitzes were. And he completed several passes and really made Indiana's defense pay for blitzing. So there's that. This offense is a little bit more balanced, and you kind of have to take into account their passing game more. And that kind of opens up their running game just a little bit more than usual, than the past several seasons. And they did, break a few runs in this game, here and there. Not real consistently, but here and there they got some good gash runs. And aided by the field position battle that they always win in every game with their special teams playing their great defense. They were able to get some field goals in there and get a touchdown in there and tie up the game at 13, and then have a chance to take a lead with under 2 minutes left on a field goal, which was missed. So, all in all, I mean, like the defense, it goes without saying, it's probably a top 10 defense in the league. It's really physical. I think they're really physical up front. Goes to show, like, the way that Indiana destroyed Illinois in the trenches, this game was pretty much even in the trenches. So I think that's a good reflection on both teams, that they're both good in the trenches, and Iowa's definitely good in the trenches. Their quarterback play has slightly improved. Their offense is slightly better. Defense probably not top 5 or top 3 like they've been, like they were from about 21 to 2023, which is kind of a shame because they kind of missed their window of opportunity because their offense was so terrible back in those years. But so I mean, this is kind of typical Iowa. Not much more to say. Every game is going to be close. Even with a really great team like Indiana, going to be a close game. A mediocre to bad team, it's going to be a close game where they just kind of win by one possession. It's just going by as scripted, really. A typical Iowa season where they're probably going to have 7 or 8, maybe 9 wins. And that's 7 to 9 win range. All right, next up on the list at number 6, I have the Washington Huskies. And they, after having a very competitive game against Ohio State where they made a good showing of themselves and even left some points on the board and really kept the game close, had an early lead in the game, and then kept the game close through almost 3 quarters. Most of the game was close. And then they follow up with a impressive comeback win against Maryland this week where it looked like they were in a hole and looked like their season was kind of on the brink here. I think this was kind of a season, potentially a season-defining game. And they really came through. Their offense was pretty much stymied in the first half. They started getting it going midway through the third quarter with a field goal. And then in the fourth quarter, they just went for broke, just aired it out, and opened things up, and they just blew the game. They just blew out Maryland in that fourth quarter. They just took total control. They held Maryland to a couple 3-and-outs. All Maryland's possessions were short. I mean, they had 4 possessions in a row, Maryland, where they just didn't do anything. And you got to give Washington credit for that. They just totally, when they really needed to dig in, they really did. And a little bit out of desperation, but they got it done. And you got to give props to Williams, their quarterback. I think they have a really dangerous, explosive offense. And it'll be interesting I don't know if they play USC this year, but it would be interesting to see these teams match up with each other because they're very similar. And I think Washington's a little bit better than USC all around. I think they're a little bit better all around. Like, they're better on defense than USC is. I think Washington is kind of decent, average on defense. Probably a little bit undersized, though. But they looked. I think they made a good account of themselves these past 2 weeks, and we'll see. I haven't looked at their schedule, but right now I think it's fair to say they're probably about the 6th best team in the league. Okay, so at number 5 I have the Fighting Illini of Illinois, and they've moved up because they've won their last 2 games, and they had a high-profile win against USC. My caveat to that, though, is that they kind of matched up somewhat well with USC, more because USC's defense is pretty terrible, and Illinois' offense is really good. USC's offense is really good, but watching that game the previous week, it just looked like because Illinois was just had the slight advantage at the line of scrimmage, things came a little bit easier for them. Whereas things were a little bit harder for USC. So I give props to Illinois for that. But really, again, the caveat is that even with these 2 wins, it's still only 2 weeks removed from their embarrassing decimation at the hands of Indiana in every phase of the game and definitely in the trenches too. And as I mentioned in the USC segment, Illinois is not a good trench team, and that's not going to really change, much in a couple weeks. And I don't think that's probably going to change very much, later in the year. They got exposed by Duke and they got exposed by Indiana, of course. But they're a well-coached team. They got a really good quarterback in Luke Altmaier. Definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And they got a really good passing offense. They're banged up in the secondary, though. And, of course, Purdue has an offense that you have to take seriously. And Purdue was able to put up some points against Illinois, about as much as you would probably expect Purdue to put up. Illinois was kind of had a comfortable lead most of the game. They had either like a 2-possession lead or a 3-possession lead, and it seemed every time Illinois had a 3-possession lead, Purdue would score and make it a 2-possession game and kind of barely hang on and stay in the game. But Illinois, I think, did pretty well in finishing the game and putting them away. So I think Illinois is probably looking at their schedule, I predict they're probably going to have another 9-3 season this year. They're kind of very much the same team as they were last year. They haven't really gotten better in the trenches. Right now, I think they're banged up in the secondary, and I haven't really kept track of who's come back from injury in the secondary, if anybody's come back or not. But I imagine once they're more healthy in the secondary, they'll be a little bit better of a team. So right now, I think Illinois belongs at number 5, and I don't see them really getting any higher than 5, though. I think that's their ceiling this year. All right, by default, moving up from 5 to 4, I have my Michigan Wolverines. They won 24-10 against a struggling down-and-out Luke Fickell Wisconsin team that came out swinging with a good first scripted drive with some creative, unbalanced alignment to take advantage of the type of defensive fronts Michigan came out with and got some success running the ball. But once Michigan adjusted after that first drive, they were able to completely shut down Wisconsin for the rest of the game, really until Michigan felt they had a comfortable enough lead to mix in some younger players from their depth chart on defense. And as a result, Wisconsin was able to get into field goal range and make a 24-7 game, a 24-10 score. Overall, as a Michigan fan, I was happy with the win, given that this could have been a potential trap game against a team whose one strength is its run defense, given Sharon Moore likes to really lean on the run. I was afraid when he came back that he would put those handcuffs right back on Bryce Underwood. But thankfully, in the second half, when he realized this was a tight game, and just running right at Wisconsin was not sustainable, he let Bryce air it out and began airing it out and actually targeting their best and most reliable receivers, being Donovan McCauley and Andrew Marsh. I was quite encouraged by both of these receivers and Bryce's ability to get the ball to them on some really nice throws. This is something that is really important in being able to do in the big games like against Ohio State. Also, after they made adjustments after that first touchdown drive given to Wisconsin, the defense looked really great overall. The return of Zeke Berry and especially Rod Moore, both having great games, is quite encouraging. I think this defense is beginning to become more of an elite defense, considering how well their secondary is coming together on top of already having an elite front seven. Now, the negatives, and there are negatives, The obvious is the drop balls, but all the drop balls were from, in this game, were from Morgan, Max Bredesen, and Kendrick Bell. Bell and Bredesen are not really targeted much at all, but Morgan is, and he finished strong in this game, but is still a liability with his ball security and is inconsistent catching the ball. The other issue that kind of stood out to me was the O line. They have been inconsistent most of these 5 games. They have moments and spans of time where they are blocking really well in unison or picking up their assignments on pass protection. And they also, had a really good block in this game that sprung another home run for Justice Haynes. And they've had a lot of these perfectly blocked plays, to their credit. But it seemed like in this game that they kind of took a step backwards and they were not picking up downhill pass rushers and they're either missing them or whiffing on them. And the same goes for the penetration that they're giving up on run plays. But there's a lot of good going on with this team, and this looks like a team that is right there in the hunt for a playoff spot and has a good chance to play in Indy for a Big Ten championship if everything goes right. And at number 3, I have the Indiana Hoosiers, and they're another team that had a bye week after their very good win against Iowa. Of course, Kinnick Stadium is known to be a place where top 5 teams go, or top 10 teams, high-ranked teams, go to die. And Indiana, to their credit, passed the test. And I don't think you need to blow out Iowa or have a big win, beat them by, 2 or 3 possessions to really have an impressive win, for that to be considered a impressive win. I think anytime you survive Kinnick Stadium, that means that you took care of the ball really well. You executed well enough on offense against a really good defense that is going to capitalize on mistakes and make you pay for them if you make any mistakes. And your trench play is going to be tested. Your special teams play is going to be tested. Your resolve is going to be tested. All those things are going to be tested against Iowa. The game is going to be brought in the mud, and it's just going to test your just ability as a team to play a clean game. Play a clean game and be able to have resolve, mental and physical toughness. And they passed the test. And that's all you really want to ask for from Indiana. And to me, this win just kind of says, that they have that. They have that aspect to their game. They have that aspect to their identity. And these kinds of wins, these kinds of attritions, can be character building, and it could be something to build off for the rest of their season. Obviously, they have a lot of momentum from that Illinois game. But this is a really good game after that game where they had to get up for this game in an ugly game, and they pulled it off. And they took the game very seriously. So everything about Indiana is just going really well right now, as well as it can possibly be, I think. And everything is going to hinge on that Oregon game for whether or not this team is going to be a Big Ten title contender, or if they're just going to be kind of a team that might back into the playoffs. They still have a chance to probably go into the playoffs if they lose to Oregon. Just based on how impressive they've looked in probably every game up to this point, and probably they'll blow out every team that they're favored to beat this year. So that's what I have to say about Indiana. They're idle this week. Looking forward to that Oregon game coming up very soon. All right, so at number 2, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I know if anybody's watching this video and has lasted this long, and you found out that I'm a Michigan fan, you probably think I'm being really biased and I'm just demoting Ohio State out of spite or something like that. But no, I mean being objective and seriously, they've looked good against just about every team they've played. They don't look they look solid everywhere. They don't have any. When I look at them, I don't see any weaknesses on this team. I don't see any liabilities. I think teams can move the ball against them a little bit, but mainly in scripted. These past two games, I think Minnesota came out with some good scripted plays, was able to move the ball and kick a field goal early in the game. Washington came out with really good scripted plays, I think. And Washington was able to kind of move the ball quite a bit, I think, in the first half last week. But once Ohio State has gotten settled into these games, they just kind of taken over and they've just totally dominated. But really, looking at their wins, there just isn't enough evidence to say that they're the best team in the Big Ten. We're definitely a top 5 team in the country, and probably top 3. There's nothing I can really go off of, with a definitive win against a really good team to really propel them to number 1. I need to see them play a really good team, and they don't play Oregon this year. They don't play Indiana. They're really not going to get. And gosh, I was going to say that, like not until Penn State will they get tested, but who knows about Penn State? So, they're going to cruise through their schedule. They got Illinois on the road. I'd say if they blow out Illinois on the road, that might be enough to put them at number 1. That's actually something to look at, to consider. But, probably not until they face Michigan at the end of the year will they be truly tested by a really good team. All right. To finish off this week's power rankings in this video for teams 9 through 1, at number 1, I have the Oregon Ducks. And I think it's much well deserved. As I was saying with Ohio State, I don't see any definitive win against any really good team, a good enough win. Penn State, I know they're falling off a cliff right now, but they're a much vastly different team right now than they were last Saturday or going into last Saturday, because everything was on the line for them, like everything. And it was a pivotal game. The most pivotal, consequential game, I think, in the James Franklin era. Because I think at this point, fans were starting to get fed up, Penn State fans that is, with the mantra of, losing every big, meaningful top 10 game. And this was a whiteout. So the stage was set. Penn State laid everything on the line in this game. They put all their chips on the table in this game. This was their best swing at it. So that's why this is a big win for Oregon. And not only that, Oregon had to travel like all the way from Washington to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's Happy Valley's basically almost East Coast. And they had to travel from Oregon there. Not only did they travel from Oregon there, they had to go to a whiteout at night and play in that noise. That's pretty much for most Big Ten teams who don't have to travel. That's like a 7 to 10 point handicap for the visiting team in a whiteout. Oregon also had to travel. So that might be like a 13, 17 point handicap, and they won the game. And in fact, they were up by 10 at one point. I think if this was at Autzen Stadium in Oregon, this would have. I think Oregon could have won this game by like 17. Really a dominant victory. If this was on a neutral field, I think Oregon wins by 2 possessions. Oregon was that dominant in that game, and they were idle this week. So I don't really have much else to say than what their performance in this game as being evidence for why they're number 1, because it's the most significant win anybody in the Big Ten has had so far.